But in truth, I had no idea what was going to happen. The only thing I knew is that everything that we knew had changed on that day.
And again, we will never forget, today marks a somber day for our nation, and even though it's been 20 years since 9/11, the grief today isn't any easier to handle for those who were impacted by the tragedy. But our mental health and wellness expert Jane Marks says we must find some hope and healing in tragic times. Here's Self-Care Saturday. Jane Marks, our mental health and wellness expert, is with me now for Self-Care Saturday. And Jane, obviously today, very, very somber day for so many. Our nation obviously is in mourning. It's been 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah, and so, you know, you talk about grief and how many people have been dealing with this year after year. This day, obviously, it doesn't get any easier for them, especially if you lost a loved one. Your heart is even heavier right now. So talk about that.
I think for a lot of people, they have not been able to face it. I saw so many interviews this morning, and one that was particularly poignant was a woman who hadn't come back in 20 years, and she was able to do it today. She said it took that long for her to be able to face it, but she did that with help and support, and she did it with the child of an officer who had helped her during that time. So it takes real moments to face that for some people. For others, they feel compassion or empathy, and as we watch it, we feel sadness. But you know what? We also feel a little hope, because these are people who have come through it. We've seen the children grow up through this experience. We've seen what's happened to our country, the changes in our country, and we know that, in effect, 9/11 changed our lives forever.
Yeah, it certainly did, and I'm reminded of Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin when he said, you never know what danger is ahead for the next 20 years, but we have to remind ourselves to be resilient in a time like this. And so talk about that. There's something called tragic optimism.
You know, it's not an interesting concept, Brittany, because it was started years ago by a guy named Viktor Frankl, and you know, we didn't really begin to talk about it until 20 years ago, when we were really dealing with tragedy on a regular basis. And basically what it means is this, is that we look for hope despite these horrific events. We figure out a way to feel optimistic. We figure out a way to find purpose despite these kinds of experiences that certainly we have no control over. And so it's a concept, and particularly because of COVID as well and all these things that have happened in the last year, it's a concept that we need to hold on to.
And Jane, what do you do at a time like this? How do you still find that hope? How do you still continue to heal, even though it's been 20 years for those people, and then other people who are dealing with grief on a different level from other things?
You know, that's true. And so I think the place to start is that as you deal with grief, never try to do it by yourself. You know, you want to be connected to someone or another person or a family who's experienced the, you know, the very same thing, because that'll help you navigate it. I think, you know, it's so important to find role models and heroes. And you know what? Sometimes you can be the role model and you can be the hero, you know, in situations like this, because you need to have that sense that you can get through this. You know, you take baby steps. Sometimes it's so raw you can't do it at first, and that is okay. Remember, your pace is different. Each person's journey of grief is unique to himself, and so you've got to be okay with the pace. You've got to also take, you know, the things that we talk about. You've got to nurture a happy body. You've got to sleep, diet, those kinds of things that historically, you know, we just sort of took them for granted. We take nothing for granted anymore. We must make sure that we make choices that are in the best interest of our health. You know, balance, all those things that you know, healthcare providers talk about are critical, and we see the evidence of it when we see the people who've been able to get through this.
Yes,
you
definitely.
know, so I think for us as a nation, as we look for those people who have walked the walk, understand we've walked it with them. You know, and you know, I could feel myself tearing up as I saw these mothers and their babies who've grown up to be 20-year-olds talking to their children, and the messages they would give to their children would be things like, yes, you can remember your loved one. Yes, you can remember your father, your uncle, or your grandfather. Just look inside of your heart, it is there. So the messages resonate, I think, with all of us as a nation and as a world.
And would you say that message, you know, to the people who are saying that hole in my heart can never be repaired?
You know what? You feel like that. You feel like there's nothing that's going to fill it. And yet, over time, and time is the greatest healer, over time what you discover is that the memories become powerful, but they also heal, and we replace it with other memories or other experiences. It's not the same, because you're never going to replace that loved one, but they're new ones, and you grow, you grow from this tragedy, and that goes back to tragedy and optimism, and how the two can combine together and can make a difference in a person's world.
Wow. Well, Jane, what's your self-care and mental health tip for the week?
Well, initially I thought about the regular kinds of things, but then I thought, no, this is a very special Saturday. So my self-care would be for those people that you love. Make sure you let them know, you tell them, you keep them close to you. And never forget that every moment throughout the course of a day is a moment to be cherished, because we simply don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So that would be my self-care tip for the week.
Yeah, and that's a message to bless everybody who's listening.
Absolutely.
All right, Jane Marks, our mental health and wellness expert. Jane, thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.